You're on.
All
right.
I'm ready to begin. Good afternoon, everyone. And I am Mary Bingham, and I'm honored to be here in the historic gift shop at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead. Welcome to Dorothy Faulkner and the Forging of Two Families. Many thanks to the Danvers Alarm List Company and the Rebecca Nurse Homestead for hosting this wonderful event. Thank you to Catherine Rutkowski, the curator for this beautiful piece of property, and Candace Dawes, a longtime volunteer and researcher. These wonderful ladies are behind the scenes manning this technology of which I have no gift of doing. So thank you so much, everybody. 1680, a year etched to the annals of history, not just for the celestial spectacle that painted the night sky, but also for the arrival of little Dorothy Faulkner amidst such dramatic times. It's fascinating how natural events like the Great Comet often became intertwined with human interpretations, reflecting the anxieties and beliefs of the era. Imagine the tales whispered around the hearth fires, linking the comet's fiery tail to notions of divine displeasure and the weight of human transgressions. And there, in the midst of all that cosmic and earthly drama, Abigail Faulkner gave birth to her third child, Dorothy, on the 15th of February, 1680-81 Old Style. One might wonder what her life held in store, growing up in a world where the heavens themselves seemed to be delivering a message. Abigail and Francis Faulkner, who lived in North Andover, would have undoubtedly witnessed the Great Comet blazing across the sky those 3 months before Dorothy's arrival. To think that the tail they saw stretched across an immense distance from their home in Massachusetts all the way to Los Angeles, California. And it's quite humbling. It underscores just how awe-inspiring and perhaps terrifying such a sight must have been for people with a very different understanding of the cosmos. The ministers of the time certainly seized upon this celestial event. In a world deeply steeped in the belief of an active, unseen spiritual realm, the comet would have been readily interpreted as an omen. The seeds of fear they sowed linked the comet to divine wrath and impending disaster and found fertile ground in the hearts of their congregations. It's a testament to the power of belief and the influence of religious leaders in that era that church attendance and membership saw such a marked increase. Everyday life, already carrying the weight of superstition and anxieties about the invisible world, would have been further colored by the sense of impending doom. Dorothy's early life would have unfolded against the backdrop of both cosmic wonder and widespread apprehension. So while the heavens displayed a grand, if unsettling, spectacle, Dorothy's earthly surroundings in the North Parish of Andover were equally wild and untamed. Imagine a landscape still heavily wooded, where the rustling leaves might very well conceal a bear or the slithering of a rattlesnake. It brings a real sense of the frontier to the mind. The fact that hunting was both a necessity for survival and a form of recreation speaks volumes about their connection to the natural world. And how fascinating that the names gave to the places still remain. Bear Hill Road, Woodchuck Hill, Rattlesnake Hill. They have persisted through the centuries right up until present day Andover. These aren't just quaint names. They are echoes of the daily realities and interactions with local fauna that Dorothy's family and neighbors experienced. You can almost picture them venturing out with their axes to these various areas. Do you have a picture of the Faulkner homestead? And this is where Dorothy was born. It's actually current day 601 Main Street located in North Andover. And it's interesting to pinpoint this family's location, which is slightly northwest of those wilder hunting grounds that I just spoke of, right where the Kittredge School now stands. That really anchors their existence to a specific point in the landscape. And how convenient it must have been to have Joseph Parker's corn mill and Stephen Johnson's sawmill right there in town, therefore making Andover a very self-sufficient town. They were able to process essential resources locally, embodying the spirit of shopping local centuries before it became a modern mantra. It speaks to a degree of economic interdependence and interconnectedness within the North Parish. The background of Dorothy's father, Francis, adds another layer to the story. Coming from a very well-to-do family with his father Edmund, a freeman, a wine cellar, a licensed innkeeper, a proprietor of Andover since its founding, the clerk of writs for Andover certainly suggests a trustworthy family of good standing and influence. The possibility that Edmund Faulkner was even involved in the initial negotiations with the Native Americans for the land adds a significant historical dimension to the Faulkner lineage within the community. It paints a picture of a family deeply rooted in the very establishment and development of Andover. Abigail Dane's lineage, as the daughter of the town's long-established minister, Francis Dane, certainly speaks to a family prominence within the community. His description of her in his later petition as a woman of steely resolve hints at an inner strength that was to be tested in the years to come. Losing a child, as Abigail did with her first daughter, Elizabeth, is an unimaginable pain. And then to bear 6 more children in relatively quick succession emphasized her resilience and the demands of motherhood in that era. After the painful death of Elizabeth, the Faulkner family had some lovely milestones to celebrate in those early years. The arrival of Dorothy's sisters Abigail in 1683 and Frances in 1686 brought a whole new dynamic and lots of joy to their family, I'm sure. However, the passing of Frances's father, Edmund, in 1687, coinciding with the onset of Frances's own illness, must have thrown the Faulkner household into profound turmoil. The clear division of labor they relied upon, with Frances managing the farm and Abigail overseeing the domestic sphere, was suddenly disrupted. With Frances incapacitated due to recurring symptoms of what were most likely seizures with comprehension and memory issues, Abigail was faced with the daunting prospect of taking on both roles. It wasn't a matter of choice, but a necessity for the survival of her large family for her to really step up to the plate. This sudden shift in responsibilities, with or without outside help, would have undoubtedly placed immense pressure on her, further highlighting that steely resolve that her father had described in later years. This also sets the stage for understanding the extraordinary strength she would need to navigate the trials that lay ahead. It's certainly plausible that Abigail and Frances Faulkner, who lived 10 miles north of Salem Village, would have heard the rumblings about the strange occurrences unfolding in the village beginning in February of 1692. News, even without modern communication, often traveled very quickly through communities. While John Hathorne, being present with Jonathan Corwin, might not have coerced confessions from everyone, their main job, which was the main part of their job, his examinations were undoubtedly intense and were supposed to elicit admissions of guilt. The fact that he secured confessions from Tituba, Abigail Hobbs, and even 4-year-old Dorothy Good speaks to his methods, even if those confessions were likely coerced under duress and fear. The image of those packed, dark, and noisy meeting houses where the accused face intense questioning in front of a community gripped by fear truly brings the atmosphere of the time to life. It underscores the immense pressure individuals were under. The ability of many to withstand Hathorne's questioning in such an environment suggests a degree of resilience and perhaps a conviction of their innocence, even in the face of overwhelming and societal pressure, all until Andover accusations erupted. So now we're getting into the spread of the accusations with the unique dynamics of this particular town, because the arrival of some of the afflicted girls from Salem Village acted as a catalyst. They ignited accusations in Andover because of the case of Elizabeth Ballard, which was key in Andover. When she fell ill and exhibited its symptoms similar to those in Salem Village, it was almost foregone conclusion in some minds that witchcraft was at play. Bringing in the Salem accusers bringing in the Salem Village accusers effectively imported the Salem hysteria northward. Their dramatic displays and accusations would have carried significant weight in the Andover community, especially given the prevailing beliefs about witchcraft. The vulnerability of the many children accused at Andover made them easy targets and carried significant emotional impact. Also, the figure of Reverend Francis Dane looms large in the Andover context. His reputation for convincing his congregation members to confess their sins within his congregation certainly adds another layer to the situation. Francis was able to convince hardened Hugh Stone, as they walked side by side to the gallows for murdering his wife, to admit that he committed against all 10 commandments. And it's a powerful illustration of Francis's persuasive abilities. It's fascinating, though not surprising, that such a figure would later become a vocal critic of the witch trials, demonstrating a moral compass that recognized the escalating injustice. His outspoken stance, even at personal risk, highlights the courage of those who dared to question the prevailing panic. The fact that many of the accused in Andover were children, again, is indeed a crucial point. It underscores the escalating nature of the accusations and the erosion of rational thought as the frenzy took hold. The targeting of the kids speaks volumes about the climate of fear and suspicion that gripped that region. Mid-May of 1692 marked the arrival of the new charter and the establishment of the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which marked a significant shift in the legal proceedings. The backlog of cases was indeed mounting, and the jails were filling up. The addition of Bartholomew Gedney, who was more of a hardline interrogant than was Hathorne, and especially John Higginson, to the judicial panel brought a new dynamic, as Higginson's presence likely meant a stricter adherence to the legal procedures, particularly regarding the filing of complaints and the requirement of a bond. This was a departure from the earlier, more informal handling of the accusations. And the assessment of Bartholomew Gedney is interesting. While John Hathorne might have relied on intimidation of leading questions, Gedney may have employed different, perhaps more persuasive techniques to elicit confessions. However, the vulnerability again of the children made them susceptible to suggestion and pressure, regardless of who was questioning them. It's certainly a thought-provoking scenario to imagine the personal lives of the Faulkner family unfolding against the backdrop of such intense community fear and suspicion. The arrival of the witch hunters and the first hangings would have undoubtedly cast a long shadow over their town, creating that atmosphere of anxiety. If Abigail Faulkner was indeed aware of her pregnancy at the time, it's natural to hope that the news brought a measure of personal joy amidst surrounding turmoil. The anticipation of a new life can often provide a powerful source of hope and focus, even in the face of external pressures. And the possibility that Frances Faulkner's illness had temporarily subsided would have offered another layer of relief and happiness for them both. Experiencing a period of improved health for a loved one can be incredibly uplifting. It's also a poignant reminder that even during historical events marked by widespread fear, um, individual lives continued with their own cycles of joy, hope, and personal challenges. The Faulkner family, like many others in their community, would have been navigating these deeply personal experiences along the unfolding drama in Salem Village. And I'm going to have Candace, if you can put up the picture of 123 Woburn Street. Okay, and if you'd like to go to the next slide. And then the next slide. And then we can stop it right there. So picture it, everybody. August 11th, 1692. Abigail is ripped from her family, arrested for the felony crime of witchcraft, and brought before John Hathorne, Jonathan Corwin, and John Higginson Jr. With all of her accusers present, again, Hathorne is the one grilling the following leading questions, wanting to get nothing less than a confession. He says to her, "You are here apprehended for witchcraft." Abigail replied, "I know nothing of it." Then all of the afflicted fell, and Hathorne motions to them, "Do you see, or do you not see?" And she responds, "Yes, but the devil does it in my shape." Now, Mary Walcott said both here and in her deposition that Abigail afflicted her on both August 9th and during the examination with the worst attack at the examination. Ann Putnam Jr. repeated what Mary said, adding only that Abigail pulled her from her horse. Mary Warren repeated what the others had said and deposed, only adding in her own behalf that she was only recently hurt by Abigail, and all of the afflicted went into fits only to calm down once Abigail touched them. And it's mentioned here that her niece, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., urged Abigail, her aunt, to confess for the credit of her town. Abigail responded to Elizabeth that God would not require her to confess, which she was not guilty. Now, Elizabeth is not present at the particular examination, so it's most likely that they were held at the same place, here, pictured here, before their examinations, and were able to converse with each other. It's not known for sure where the people accused in Andover were questioned, but Abigail gave a hint as to where they were holed up before being hauled before the judges. And here, This is 123 Woburn Street. This would have been the site of the Chandler Inn. And the first two pictures that Candace showed you was across the street where the Garrison was. And the Garrison is where Abigail will state that she was with all of those others that were talking to her before she was, or around the time that she was actually interrogated by the judges. So 10-year-old Sarah Phelps, during the examination again, hurled accusations at Abigail after Abigail squeezed the piece of cloth she was holding, which allegedly caused the girls to fall into fits, choking and causing them, again, more physical displeasure of sorts. Abigail was fed up. She said, "I'm sorry they're afflicted." And the magistrates mistook the statement for an apology, but they noticed that Abigail didn't cry and apparently didn't show any sign of anguish. Therefore, according to the judges, this was a sign of guilt. Abigail continued, "I looked at some of the girls when they came to Andover, and when I looked at them, I didn't hurt them." Someone from the audience bellowed back, "But that was before you began to afflict them." And Abigail responded, "No, that story had already been cleared up." Later that month, Abigail spoke with the magistrates again. Ironically, the same day, a warrant was issued for the arrest of her sister, Elizabeth Johnson Sr. Based on what Abigail told the magistrates on August 30th, again, I'm going to repeat a little bit, she was held at the Chandler Garrison on the night of August 11th with several others. And those in her company laughed while they told Abigail that her sister was about to be accused now that her niece, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., had been questioned as well. Abigail told the magistrates that she was angry with everyone who accused her family and wished that they should be afflicted for, and I quote, "bringing her kindred out," end quote, knowing that the devil might take advantage. She went on to say that it would be the devil who afflicted, not her. This paints a very vivid picture of the tense atmosphere because Abigail had already been questioned and was at the Garrison. One might surmise that some of the accused were held there after their arrest and before they appeared themselves before the magistrates. And since the Garrison was right across the street from William Chandler's Inn, one might assume that some or all of the Andover pre-trial examinations might have been held there. Again, this is based on the evidence that Abigail provided to the magistrates. This information aligns with the need to detain people nearby who were waiting for legal proceedings to be brought against them. The fact that Abigail Faulkner Sr. resisted these attempts to extract a confession from her speaks to her strength and her conviction. It highlights that not everyone succumbed to the pressure. Even with changing composition of the court, her case stands in contrast to the tragic confessions obtained from the children. About 2 weeks later, on September 16th, 10-year-old Dorothy and her 8-year-old sister Abigail Jr. were arrested for the same crime as their mother. It's heartbreaking to think about the terror that Dorothy and Abigail Jr. must have felt. Separated from their mother, likely confused and scared, and then thrust into such a terrifying and incomprehensible situation with the magistrates. Their vulnerability in that moment is just devastating. It really brings home the human cost of these accusations. A few weeks later, on October 6th, a lot of the adults started to ask, what is it going to take to release these kids from jail? And that's a direct question that Margot had inferred to me when Margot Burns, when she and I were talking about this. What's it going to take to release these kids from jail? These kids were living in cold, dark conditions so horrendous with lice, mice, and floors covered in dirt and excrement, all while shackled, as iron was thought to be specters. I'm sorry, as iron was thought to keep specters from flying to and from attacking other people. So many, especially those from Andover, started to post bonds. John Osgood and Abigail Sr.'s brother, Nathaniel Dane, put up a 500-pound sterling silver bond and had Dorothy and Abigail released into their care with the agreement that the girls would be returned to the Salem jail to be held for any future appearance that was required before the court, as so instructed by Sheriff George Corwin. Luckily, the girls never had to return to the jail, and they were never tried, and they eventually were cleared by proclamation the following May, 1693. Governor Phipps's decision to dissolve the Court of Oyer and Terminer around this time and establish the Superior Court of Adjudicature to begin in January of 1693 marked a significant shift in the legal proceedings. The exclusion of spectral evidence based on the minister's recommendation was a crucial step towards a more rational approach to justice. However, the fate of those already imprisoned or condemned remained precarious. The fact that even those who were condemned, including those who were still faced the gallows, highlights the complex and often unforgiving nature of the legal system of that time. In December, Abigail Sr., still facing a death sentence based on spectral evidence alone, must have been terrified, and her pregnancy offered only a temporary reprieve. Her plea to Governor Phipps emphasized the lack of tangible evidence and the urgent needs of her ailing husband and family, and it paints a vivid picture of the human cost of the Salem witch trials. It's interesting to note how her pregnancy became a factor in delaying her execution, though only by accident. This highlights a fascinating, albeit grim, intersection of the legal and social norms of the time. The fact that her release hinged on both a potential pardon and the payment of her jail fees underscored the complex and often arbitrary nature of justice during that period. Abigail eventually was released. We don't know exactly when, but the birth of her child, Ami Ruhama, before March 20th, 1693, provides a crucial timeline marker for that eventual release. What a relief it must have been for her to finally return home to her family. 5 years of relief must have been welcomed as the Faulkner family learned to navigate around each other in their new normal. Though the name was still tarnished, being dead to the law, Frances returned to health, and the new baby quickly to a 5-year-old child. With Dorothy and Abigail Jr. now closing in on their teen years, relieved a little of the stress as Abigail Sr. now relied on her daughters to help with the necessary workload of running the house. Sadly, that sense of calm did not last. Pasco Chubb, a resident of Andover and married to Francis's sister, Hannah, was an English captain in command of Fort William Henry at Pemaquid, which is present-day Bristol, Maine, during King William's War. And in 1696, the French and native forces attacked the settlement in the siege of Pemaquid, and Captain Chubb surrendered the fort. However, he did something that was really not very nice. The agreement was that both sides should surrender prisoners. However, Pasco secretly ordered his men to get the natives drunk, and as a result, 2 Abenaki chiefs and 2 natives were killed, while many others were taken hostage. Pasco was then stripped of his command and tossed in jail, and released eventually, and he did return to Andover. However, The consequences of his actions proved deadly for his family. The Abenakis made a surprise retaliatory visit to Andover, burned buildings, scattered livestock, and destroyed town records. Before surrounding the Bradstreet house, they took Dudley Bradstreet and some of his family captive, only to release them because they had remembered a kindness that the Bradstreet family had previously shown to the Abenakis. But Pasco and Hannah Chubb were not spared, being the apparent reason for this visit. They were both killed, leaving their 8-year-old daughter, Dorothy's cousin, an orphan, and who was also, and they also killed another young woman, Penelope Aslett. The Faulkner family was devastated, one can be sure, and the entire community was placed on edge once again. This paints again a tragic picture of the consequences that ripped through their community, and it's a stark reminder of how deeply personal and devastating these conflicts were. The act of kindness shown by the Bradstreets, offering a moment of reprieve within the violence, highlights the complex relationships that could exist even amidst brutality. But things finally started to get better, and Abigail Sr. continued to speak out on her behalf for herself, of her immediate family, and for the generations to follow. In 1700, Abigail once again petitioned the court, which was now assembled in Boston. She wrote of her circumstances as she did with Governor Phipps only 8 years before, adding that he did issue her a reprieve and a pardon, and regarding her wrongful conviction due to insufficient proof. However, Abigail was concerned because her reputation was ruined and she was still a convicted felon under the eyes of the law. These two facts, Abigail continued, could open her up to more believable accusations, which would remain as a perpetual brand of infamy upon my family, she told them. She also sadly pointed out that hatred cast a pall over her descendants, and Abigail asked the court to erase the record against her. For some unknown reason, this request was not acted upon. However, Francis is probably now feeling much better as he joins a petition in 1703, a petition which lists his name first in the title, to clear the records of Abigail along with Rebecca Nurse, Mary Esty, Mary Parker, John Proctor, and his wife, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth Howe, Samuel Wardwell, and his wife, Sarah. This petition defined their surnames as being reproached, as their loved ones are now considered felons. The fallout to the next generation was damaging. This is a significant step forward and must have been a tremendous relief for Abigail and her family. Francis taking the lead on that 1703 petition, with his name appearing first, speaks to his commitment to clearing his wife's name and the names of those who were unjustly accused. On the 27th of July, 1703, an act was passed which reversed the attainders of Abigail Sr., Sarah Wardwell, and Elizabeth Proctor. Notice this act names 3 women. One might surmise this was necessary, especially in the cases for Elizabeth and Sarah, so they could now conduct legal business as their husbands were deceased. The reversal of attainder would have had significant legal implications for these women, especially if their husbands had passed away. Being attainted essentially stripped a person of their civil rights and could impact their ability to inherit or manage property. What a relief for the Faulkner family that their name was restored and Francis was able to conduct business and take care of the farm, while Abigail now could tend to her duties with the removal of that unnecessary stress. Dorothy, Abigail, and their sister Frances were all young adults and able to help their mother, adding more to the relief. They all now had honed their craft of keeping a home and probably wondering about their prospective husbands. Meanwhile, 26 miles to the southeast of where Dorothy lived, 26-year-old single Samuel Nurse Jr. was probably living with his father in the house which his brother Ebenezer would inherit, which is probably somewhere on or present day Hyde Street in Danvers. Samuel Nurse would have remembered the horrifying details of what happened to his grandmother Rebecca in 1692, him being 13 years old at the time. He would also have learned loyalty to his family as he witnessed his father, aunt, and uncles tirelessly advocate for their mother and motivate many others on her behalf as well. Samuel Jr. was probably the perfect husband for Dorothy. While we don't have a specific account of how Samuel Nurse Jr. and Dorothy met and married, it's likely their common union arose from one of the societal structures of the time, a societal tie, because they lived so far apart. So we can't ascertain exactly how they met, but they both were victims as their families had suffered through such horrific events in 1692. The only one document from 1636 to 1692 which possibly placed the Faulkner and Nurse family together was when the petition of 1703 was signed. However, the signers of the petition may not even have been signing it at the same time in the same place. But if they did, maybe Francis Faulkner remembered the Nurse family 5 years down the road when his daughter, in her late 20s, was still unmarried. We won't ever know for sure. What is most plausible is that Samuel Jr.'s character, shaped by witnessing his family's loyalty and the injustice they faced, likely made him a dependable and principled partner. Dorothy, in turn, would have been marrying into a family known for their strength and integrity despite the tragic events that they had endured. And the two had a common childhood experience. Candace, can you put up the picture of the Nurse homestead? Sure. Thank you. That's a beautiful picture. Thank you for choosing that one. And so it happened. 28-year-old Dorothy and 31-year-old Samuel were the second marriage in the Faulkner family, being married in November of 1708. The first joyous occasion took place in May of that same year when Dorothy's sister, Abigail, married Thomas Lamson and moved to Ipswich, which must have caused a longing in Dorothy's heart. Dorothy's sister, who lived such a tragic childhood experience with her, was no longer physically present every day with whom to laugh, gossip, and comfort. When Dorothy married Samuel, we can't be certain if she was living over with his family near current-day Hyde Street, but according to Samuel's father's will, dated in 1715, the couple was definitely living on this site at the time of his death. As Samuel Sr. states in his will, and I quote, "Item which I give to Samuel Jr. is the house and land where he now dwells, which I have given him deed," end quote. At the bottom of the document, Samuel Sr. stipulated, and I quote, "I give my lands and meadows to my son Ebenezer after mine and my wife's decease." So therefore, I'm surmising that he was living there with Ebenezer, and that therefore just kind of giving over that home to him only after his death. The first years of Dorothy's married life were relatively calm and joy-filled as she and Samuel welcomed Abigail in the spring of 1710, a name that must have filled Dorothy's mother with pride and joy. After all, the firstborn daughter was usually named for their mother, but Dorothy broke with that tradition, a testament to her relationship with her own mother. Then they welcome Rebecca, most likely a testament to Samuel's grandmother. And Rebecca was welcomed in the summer of 1712. Dorothy and Samuel returned to the tradition by naming their third child and their firstborn son for his father, Samuel Jr. And Samuel Jr. was born in the spring of 1715. But now it gets interesting. Dorothy, Samuel, and their three children experience what is on Sidney Purley's record as one of the worst storms in the early 1700s. Here's the story. The severe storm of 1716 blanketed the Northeast for 1 month after snow fell for almost 6 consecutive days, with the strongest of the snowfall on Sunday, February 24th, when religious services were suspended for the day. That must have been pretty bad for that to happen. People had no choice but to hang out by their hearths, seeing no one but their own family for 1 month. Snow totaled as high as 20 inches in some places and no lower than 10 inches in other areas. Large snowdrifts caused one-story houses to become totally blanketed, becoming invisible to their neighbors. Houses with upper chambers had an advantage where after the storm had finally passed, people could escape out their chamber windows and make necessary visits to the neighbors nearby. However, there is a story that a Newbury man missed his significant other so much that he did escape out that second-story chamber window and traveled 1 mile over a snowdrift, now made of crust, and enter his beloved house through her upper chamber. And the woman's family was undoubtedly very happy to see someone other than one of their own, hoping to find out how their neighbors were doing. Imagine the one-story houses disappearing under the snow and people using upper-story windows as escape routes. It's quite striking. And the story of a Newbury man traversing far over hardened snowdrift to reach his beloved is a testament to human desire for connection. And it makes one wonder about the ingenuity and resilience of people during that era. There is another story of Good Samaritans making the rounds to check on their neighbors once the storm had subsided. There was one story where a widow living with her children in a one-story house was only found because men saw smoke coming out of the snow. The snow had covered her chimney so much that it was not visible to the naked eye. When they entered the house, they found that the woman had to burn her furniture in her fireplace because wood for her hearth was not readily available. So Samuel, hoping maybe with the help of his family living close by, among others, may have dug tunnels through the snow to get to his barn, to care for his animals, and hopefully to a passageway to his firewood. Who knows? Maybe he and Dorothy had to burn some of their own furniture as well to keep the littles warm. They may have also relied on Samuel's family who lived close by, maybe digging their own passageways in the snow to their homes to pull their resources together. Throughout the community, coastal and most likely inland, as Salem Village was, cattle wound up smothered under the snow. Some found still standing died of starvation. Many sheep were lost. Most were found dead, huddled together as though they were keeping each other warm. The chickens and the turkeys that survived did so only by eating edible dandelion plant known as tandy, which was used mostly for cooking and medicine. The nurses probably lost a lot of what they had stored up that winter, causing worry as to how they would make it until the spring. Thank you. That's a beautiful picture, Candace. Again, orchards were damaged, and the drifts were so thick that the cattle could actually walk on the drifts, eating smaller twigs at the top of the drifts, causing, again, the cattle to get sick. as those twigs got stuck in their throat. Farmers spent weeks digging out cows, sheep, chicken, and pigs, with only few surviving. It's highly probable they would have undertaken the arduous task of digging tunnels to reach their barn, hopefully, so that they could, the nurse family could actually get wood for themselves. Life continued, and their son Francis was born in the early summer of 1717, followed by Eunice in the late summer of 1718. And again, shortly after, in 1719, an appearance of a cloud with a rainbow of bright colors lit up the northern sky, curving from the east and extending westward. Additional clouds colored red were added and shot straight overhead and then moved swiftly east before disappearing, accompanied by a flash of light. Since there was no artificial night lighting, this display above their heads must have seemed so bright to them, almost blinding, I would suspect. One might wonder if Dorothy and Samuel fearfully wondered what calamity God would send as a result of their sinful behavior, or was this the end of days? These fears lessened among the community as similar nighttime wonders in the sky occurred over the next few days without detrimental consequences. By 1736, people were familiar with the term aurora borealis. It's certainly understandable that their first reaction might have been one of fear and religious interpretation. In that era, unusual natural phenomena were often seen as omens or signs from a higher power, sometimes indicating impending doom. Then there was the earthquake of 1727, which followed a very dry and hot summer, followed by a cold fall. One might imagine that the nurses settling in for the night in October 29th, after a bitter cold few days, finally giving way to one day of pleasant weather, when a terrible noise erupted, causing doors to fly open, goods to fly off the shelf, beds to move violently. Well, you kind of all get the picture. They had experienced quite the earthquake. Again, the colonists believed this was an act of a vengeful God. Their ministers preached that the time to repent was now. This was a wake-up call. The result? Some new parishioners were added to the membership church, while others who had been considered to have fallen away returned to the fold. And this paints a truly terrifying picture of the 1727 earthquake. After experiencing such unusual weather patterns, the intense heat and drought, followed by a sharp cold snap, the colonists must have already felt a sense of unease. And then all of a sudden, for this to erupt, must have been very fearful for them. Dorothy and Samuel were caught up in the chaos, and it must have been very sobering for them. The sounds alone must have been deafening, and the physical shaking so violent that simply staying upright would have been a struggle. That's right, because a lot of them actually departed out their houses, and they either fell to the ground or they would have sat down to avoid falling to the ground. In 1730 was the year that Dorothy lost her mother. The woman who was the backbone of the Faulkner family was now gone, leaving her legacy with Dorothy, who passed it on to her own children. And then her father, Francis, died only 2 years later. But like the spring ever returning, so did joyous events take place. Dorothy and Samuel's daughter, Abigail, married John Porter and bore their first grandchild that same year. Also that same year, their young son-in-law died, sadly, leaving Dorothy to help her young daughter grieve such a heartbreaking tragedy. So her daughter married and the son died. Her son-in-law died a few months later. Very, very sad for that family. It seems that the marriages of her daughter Eunice to Benjamin Porter and her son Samuel to Elizabeth Kellogg both happened in 1739, with another grandson, David, born to Samuel and Elizabeth that same year. So that year was kind of happy in a lot of ways, but very sad in a lot of ways as well, as with the nature of life. Then came what was probably Dorothy's most significant loss in 1740, the passing of her husband, who loved and protected her and their family for 32 years. As he was ill before he died, suggests that Dorothy took care of Samuel until his dying day. The following winter of 1740 and 41 was absolutely brutal. 25 snowstorms. Just try to imagine the sheer volume of snow and relentless cold is difficult. But for Dorothy, having to face such a harsh winter without Samuel must have added immense grief and hardship to an already challenging situation. The preceding season certainly set the stage for disaster. A cool summer, early frost, which jeopardized the vital corn crop, and the subsequent heavy rains and flooding, which compounded the problem, preventing proper ripening. The early freezing of the North River in October was an ominous sign of the extreme temperatures to come. The prolonged period of snow and rain in November led to severe flooding, and then to subsequent icing, and brought life to a standstill. The inoperable mills caped by ice negatively impacted the entire community by disrupting the essential process like grinding grain. People used oxen-drawn sleds to cross frozen rivers, emphasizing the extraordinary conditions to which they were forced to adapt. The lingering snow into the spring would have created a pervasive sense of anxiety amongst the farmers who feared a repeat of the previous year's crop failure. The succession of difficult weather events culminating in such severe winter and the loss of Samuel must have been an incredibly trying time for Dorothy and her family. Can you pull up the pictures of Frances Nurse's gravesite? Unfortunately, we don't know when Dorothy actually passed away, but we do know some of the legacy she passed on through her children and her grandchildren. Her son, Francis, 58 years old at the time, answered the Lexington alarm at 9 a.m. on the warm day of April 19th from this very farm. Francis, a sergeant with the company headed by his distant cousin, John Putnam, heard the horsemen riding through the town screaming, "There's a battle in Lexington. We have met the British. Hurry to help." And they didn't need a second alarm. He was off and running. Well, maybe not running because he was 58 years old, but, as quick as he could. Instead of going directly to Lexington, all 8 companies in Danvers went to nearby Acton, which was then called Menotomy. Thank you, Candace. Francis most likely saw action at the Jason Russell House, being surprised by the force of the British Army there, and his wife Eunice probably went to wait for news with the other concerned family members who gathered at New Mills. Dorothy's grandson, through her son Samuel, would also have been there as he was a private, but not with the same company. After doing this research, I realized what a powerful story Dorothy's is to tell, not only because of the initial trauma she suffered as a child, but she embodied the living, breathing connection on this historic property from a dark historical past whose future generations fought for freedom. And Dorothy Faulkner Nurse actually lived on this property longer than Rebecca Nurse and Frances Nurse did, because when they were on this property beginning in 1678, they were here for about 14 years before Rebecca's trial and execution. And then Francis lived until the later 1690s. So they were here much longer than that. And I'm honored to walk this place where Dorothy and Rebecca lived and their families. And I'm so honored to have brought this story to all of you. And I would like to finish with pictures of Eunice Porter's gravesite, who was Dorothy's daughter, and then the additional pictures of Francis Nurse's gravesite as he's being honored by the Danvers Alarm List Company reenactment. Thank you very much, everybody. Are there any questions?
You can invite if you wanted.
Yes. Yes. Would anybody have any questions?
Anybody writing any questions? I was comment and we can check on the one too.
If anybody is interested, if you have questions at a later time, you can always email me at mary.bingham@endwitchhunts.org. And I'd be happy to entertain any future questions you might have. Thank you again, and thank you, Candace and Catherine, and thank you again to the Danvers Alarm List Company and the Rebecca Nurse Home Site for hosting this very important story. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.